community?
Well, community has two meanings really. One is a community of interest, so maybe a particular group that has a particular need or interest. And secondly, a neighbourhood or a place where people live together and perhaps share some identity because they live in that place. Of course, there are many communities that we have in our cities that are quite complex because they're one place but many different groups of people living in that area.
And how do these people connect to each other?
Well, that's
especially in big cities.
Well, that's very interesting because, you know, in the UK, about 20 or so years ago, there were race riots in some of our large cities. And after that, they conducted a serious piece of research on why this should happen. And one of the things they discovered was that a lot of children that came from different ethnic groups didn't mix outside school. The only place they met each other was inside schools. Outside schools, they lived in their families, but they went to different places to worship, even different places to shop. So it was considered really important that schools acknowledged that they had a function in community cohesion and bringing communities together. And now all schools in Britain, even in schools where they serve more homogenous communities, have to recognise that they have some responsibility for helping the different groups to work together harmoniously.
Please tell us some more about when and where the whole idea of community schools has started.
Oh, I'm not sure that that's easy to do because it's grown from the bottom up in so many different places. We've had community schools of some description in the United Kingdom since the 1930s. But if you look at people like, say, Paulo Freire, who is an educationalist working in Latin America, he started schools on the basis that both pupils and teachers were joint learners working together. Teachers were able to facilitate learning for children, but also for their parents. So you see it developing in different places. You also see the way in which they've developed, say in the UK, in the very beginning, they just acknowledged that here were buildings with assets that should be available to the community. And so quite often the concept was only about dual use, being used in the evening so that those assets weren't wasted. The idea around community schools that we've been talking about today, certainly in the West, have developed because we found that children were failing at school. There were large numbers, an unacceptable number of children, particularly from poorer backgrounds, that were failing. And so we had to do something different that was going to engage them. And that involved working with their parents, and it involved levering in other services and other learning opportunities in order to halt that disenchantment that many had with schools.
And why do you think that community schools are the better environment for children to grow and learn?
Because a good community school will have the child at the centre and the child's needs at the centre. Will acknowledge that that child is being shaped by the family and that the family lives in a wider community. So first of all, a community school will acknowledge that a child doesn't arrive in a vacuum, but they have all these other shapes, other elements shaping them. Secondly, we know from a lot of evidence, a lot of research, that each of these topics, after school activities, engaging parents, bringing in additional services, supporting the wider community and building a learning culture in the community, are all individually good things. There's stacks of evidence to show that. So a community school simply brings all this good practice together, and really that's why in some countries that do very well, like for example in some of the Scandinavian countries, they don't call them community schools. It's good practice for all schools.
And tell us one success story, how an ordinary school has turned into community one. And in fact, what one school has to do or to offer so as to call itself community school.
Well, I think the first thing that a community school needs to do is to understand that it is part of the community, it's not separate from, and it can't keep the community out. So the first thing is a state of mind in which you welcome the offering that parents who know their children better than you do and other organisations in the community have to offer, and you take the best and use it for your school. So I guess the first place to start is to start talking to parents and learning the skills about how you can consult with parents and engage parents in a way that will encourage them to come to school. A lot of us remember our teachers from our childhood as quite scary people. So they need to work with parents in different ways, in new ways. And I hope we'll be looking at some of those skills in the next few days when we work together.
Yeah, so am I. And among the 9 standards for community schools, which one is the most difficult for schools to attain?
I don't know that there's one. I would say there are 4 actually that are the most challenging. They're leadership, partnership, and that's where you're very fortunate here because you have standing by 120 organisations that already work with children and parents in school. So that should be easy for you. Social inclusion is a real big issue because it requires a complete new mindset really. And school culture as well. Opening up the school, making a school feel like a fun place to be in, helping children to realise that they have a part to play in how the school is run and what's being taught and how it's being taught, but it's focused and disciplined as well. Getting that balance right is very important, but very challenging.
Yeah. And what is the primary motivation for one school to become community one? And are there any mandatory conditions for that?
Well, of course there have to be conditions in which it's possible for head teachers to make decisions and to try new things. If they're not allowed to do these things because of the regulations or the law of the land or because local administrations intervene, then of course that doesn't help. And because this is innovative and experimental for the schools, they have to be allowed to make mistakes. We learn by mistakes, not always by doing everything right first time. So there has to be that kind of atmosphere. What makes communities, head teachers decide that their school is going to be a community school? It can be different reasons. Sometimes you have a new principal arrive at a school and they already have the values that I've discussed, that they want to see the school open, they want to work with the parents, they see themselves as servants of the community and of those families. Others, I would say probably quite a few, will have been pushed into it because they have discovered that the society, the neighbourhood around where they're working is changing rapidly and that they can't engage all the children properly and see them do well at school unless they bring others in to help. So some maybe a little reluctantly at first, but I would guarantee that all those who have made that transition, even though it's hard work, have reaped the benefits because they've got more expertise to draw on, they've got a better mandate from the local community who support them, and eventually they get better results for their kids at school.